A dog barks when his master is attacked. I would be a coward if I saw that God's truth is attacked and yet would remain silent. John Calvin.
Get in a long tube with a bunch of demons.
You really believe that human beings are demons?
No, I do not. And don't you ever say I did.
This is my Bible. I am what it says I am.
There's probably a balance between, I believe you have to know Christ, but
God is in hell. He is. And someone knows this for sure. All of mankind is going to end up somewhere in heaven.
My mission really is to just help people of faith, especially, to re-examine this issue, to realise the church has got things wrong in the past.
For those who are God's by faith in His Son.
Corinthians, right? 2 Corinthians 3:7.
Victory in the name which is above every name.
There's no exception for rape or incest. It's an extreme law. And
right now, bones, ligaments, tendons, in Jesus' name. Get out here right now.
So put your trust in the sovereign risen king, who doesn't owe you one cotton picking thing. And yet he still promises to furnish his disciples, but we take what he's created and we turn him into idols. I'll never back down, so how can I keep it in? But you'll never see me preaching the sin of TBM. Yeah, spirit and truth is worship viewed in this chemistry, but some are spewing distorted views of the Trinity. With the enemy there, lies have been bought. Whether you like it or not, you will either get shot. No reverence from these reverends, only pathetic benevolence who claims to heal without a shred of medical evidence. They in the public side, lukewarmer than kitchens. On live television saying Mormons are Christians. I'm not throwing stones, I'm simply shouting the truth. So if you never knew, now you're without an excuse. If you still wanna play with them cards, then let's run them. Cause even Satan speaks to others like Jeff Dunham. So who are you with? Denies a gray area. Don't make another preacher lie when they bury ya.
If you're going to heaven and you know you ain't got no sin in your life, it's time to die.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to The Master's Dog, episode 58. I am your host, the Evangelical Norm. So, The Master's Dog is my podcast where I deal with false teachers, heretics, you name it, we deal with it here. It started out as Faith and Beliefs Refuted, where I dealt with, responded to videos put out by the Saints Unscripted, formerly known as Three Mormons podcast, under the title Faith and Beliefs. They started with the LDS Articles of Faith. I said I would respond to every single video they did under that section of their podcast, and I have done so to this point. And later on, I expanded it to deal with all kinds of false teachers, prosperity, gospel, so on. So today we are back to what we've done from the beginning, and we're dealing with the faith and beliefs of the LDS people from the Saints Unscripted podcast. David Snell is going to get into something today that I really never expected to be in the faith and beliefs portion. Because it really doesn't fall under that. It's a history thing, but they've been mixing it up with a lot of stuff. So it's not just faith and belief section of their podcast is not just dealing with doctrine, faith, and beliefs. It's dealing with history. They did a 5-part flyover look at Christian history as Mormons view it. And so now we're getting into more history. And again, I never thought I'd see them do anything like this. But today, David is going to kind of take us through the history of the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Now, there not a whole lot I would refute in what he says, simply because my knowledge of the detailed history of the Mountain Meadows Massacre is not that great. I've never even heard of it until I late in my life. So, and that's going to be a little bit of what we're going to talk about. So I'll let him go. If there is things that pop up that I want to address as we go, I will. But more than likely, we're just going to let him tell us the LDS side of the story, basically, and then we'll talk about a little something at the end. So with that, we will jump in here and let David tell us about the Mountain Meadows Massacre.
Hey guys, we're going to talk about something pretty heavy today.
There's that word again, heavy.
Historian Richard Turley summed up the issue well. On September 11th, 1857, some 50 to 60 local militiamen in southern Utah, aided by some American Indians, massacred about 120 immigrants who were traveling by wagon to California. The horrific crime, which spared only 17 children aged 6 and under, occurred in a highland valley called the Mountain Meadows, roughly 35 miles southwest of Cedar City. We're going to cover this issue in two parts. In this episode, we're just going to talk about what happened, and in the next episode, we'll talk about the aftermath of the event, and we'll answer some common questions. Cue the intro. Latter-day Saints by 1857 were no strangers to persecution. They thought they'd be safe under their own system of government in Utah, which at the time they settled there was safely outside of the United States, until the Mexican-American War ended and Utah was annexed. The Saints drove out some federal appointees and sent a legislative message demanding greater control of the territory. Considering their actions rebellious, U.S. President James Buchanan sent a large part of the U.S. Army to seat and protect a new set of officers, including a non-Latter-day Saint governor, to replace Brigham Young. This marks the beginning of the Utah War.
War? You call that a war?
Brigham Young and the Saints, recalling past maltreatment at the hands of some government officials on all levels, thought incoming soldiers meant an invasion, and they intended to fight back.
You will be forced out. We'll defend ourselves. We'll stay in our homes. Refuse we will keep our land.
Young instructed the Saints to stockpile their grain and other supplies in preparation for war, instead of trading goods out to immigrant trains passing through. That was understandably frustrating to an immigrant train that tried with a little success to resupply in Cedar City. Tensions ran high, and a few immigrants made some idle threats against the Saints.
Hey, bro. You're cruising for a bruising.
Enter stage right Isaac Haight, the mayor of Cedar City, also a militia major and stake president. One account said that cursing and drunk men went to Haight's house and demanded that he come out, if he was a man. The men also yelled threats about sending an army from California to seize young Haight, Dame, who we'll meet in a moment, and every other Mormon in the country. Haight tried to have these men arrested for intoxication and disturbing the peace, but was forced to back down when he didn't have enough policemen to carry out the order.
And he's Batman.
So Major Haight appealed to the district militia commander, William Dame, also a stake president in nearby Parowan, for permission to call out the militia against the wagon train to make those arrests and likely charge some fines. Dame convened a council which told Haight to ignore the threats. Words are but wind, they injured no one. But Haight and some others, angry and probably afraid, wouldn't let things go. So they concocted a terrible, totally unjustifiable plan.
Very bad feeling about this.
With the help of Militia Major John D. Lee, they planned to rile up local Native Americans and have them attack the wagon train that had since left town. Under no one's authority but their own, they set the wheels of their plan in motion. On Sunday, September 6th, Haight again brought up the question of the wagon train at a local council meeting, but withheld the fact that the cogs of his plan were already turning. The council decided a rider should be sent to Brigham Young to seek his advice on what to do. But it was too late. John D. Lee led the first attack on the immigrants on Monday morning. The immigrant train circled the wagons and hunkered down for the siege. To make matters worse, there were two immigrants who had been off looking for lost cattle at the time of the attack. Two white militia leaders tracked them down and tried to kill them before they became privy to the situation and went for help. But one of the immigrants survived and made it back to the wagon circle. Now the immigrants knew that white men, Latter-day Saints, were involved in the attack.
Oh, great. Mormons.
The conspirators were faced with a haunting dilemma. If the party was allowed to live, they'd surely spread word of the attack, which could bring down the wrath of the United States down on them and their families. The other option was unimaginably evil, to kill everyone old enough to tell stories about what had happened. But to do that, they'd need more help from the militia, and for that, they'd need permission from the commanding officer, William Dame. Isaac Haight met in council with Dame and other Parowan leaders on Wednesday, September 9th. The council decided to send the militia to help the immigrants gather their scattered cattle and continue on to California. But Haight met privately with Dame after the council, hoping to reverse the decision.
This is a secret meeting, Quince.
It's not totally clear what happened at that meeting, but Haight left feeling like he had permission to call out the militia to deal the final blow, which he did. On September 11th, under a white flag, John D. Lee convinced the emigrants to lay down their arms, promising that the militia would escort the party back to Cedar City.
But I got a bad feeling about this.
About a mile down the trail, at a predetermined signal, the militiamen launched an attack in which everyone in the party except 17 young children was killed. 2 days later, the reply from Brigham Young arrived, which said, "In regard to emigration trains passing through our settlements, we must not interfere with them until they're first notified to keep away. You must not meddle with them. If those who are there will leave, let them go in peace." When Isaac Haight read the message, he reportedly sobbed, saying, "Too late, too late." Now, this has been a very brief description of this event. If you want to dive deeper, I highly recommend this book, which is extremely thorough. The Mountain Meadows Massacre was a shameful tragedy, and there are still lots of questions and conspiracy theories about this event that we're going to look at in the next episode. Once that episode is up, we'll link it in the description. Check out the other links and notes below while you're at it, and have a great day.
Okay, so that was, like he said, a very brief explanation, so here's the thing about the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Again, I don't know how much of what he said is true, because, again, dealing with LDS history, it's very revisionist. As you look at things that happened from years ago and the recorded history from years ago, those things get changed because the Mormons lie. Bottom line, the history of the LDS Church is filled with lies, with deceptions and so on. So I would say take any of this video, any of the stuff that he said with very, very much with a grain of salt. Do your own research. From what I know of the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and here's my biggest issue. I grew up in Utah. If this was the way that it was, just a horrible thing that happened, and and so on, and it had really nothing to do with the leadership of the LDS Church or anything else, why was it never taught? No Utah history class, social studies class that I ever took while I was a student here in Utah up through the 8th grade was the Mountain Meadows Massacre ever mentioned. Ever. I never heard of it until I got to high school in Colorado, and then I remember it being kind of glossed over because we're in Colorado. We're not really dealing with Utah history anymore. I think it was in a U.S. history class, and it was basically briefly mentioned, but I saw I can't remember what channel it was on, whether it was the History Channel or whatever, but I did see a 3-part miniseries explanation of the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and I was shocked. I was shocked that I had never heard of this. My entire time living in Utah, I had never heard of this. Well, again, this is Utah, and it's really hard to separate the state from the church in which it is founded, and so all of the history classes were basically whitewashed, right? So with the fact that this was never taught, and I don't know if it is now or not, the reason why the LDS are coming out and talking about it now is the internet. You can't hide from it. You can't hide from it. So now they're coming out and they're spinning. So again, this is like things that we're dealing with right now. The issues with George Floyd and his death at the hands or the knee of a police officer, and then you get people who want to bring up his criminal history, right? And this is, as if to try to justify what the officer did because of this criminal history. This is what this story did. I mean, immediately they're blaming, in a sense, the wagon train, the Fancher, I can't remember, the Fancher something party. That I have it right here. I don't know why I didn't. Let me get the name again. The Baker Fancher wagon train. Sorry. Immediately, as his story starts, we start getting drunken guys and threats and so on, and it's all prefaced by the fear of war and armies and so on. So he's literally giving some, and even though he says it's a horrible crime and it's a horrible thing, they're laying the foundation of justification. Because we're fearful and they made threats and so on. So you see the veiled attempt at justifying, at least in part, what happened. And so the horrible, and then they leave out. He leaves out the portions where the Mormon men, many of them actually dressed up like Indians. So whether or not actual Native Americans participated in this at all, we really don't know. There is evidence that there may have been a few that were brought in somehow, but the majority of the Native Americans that attacked this wagon train were Mormon men dressed up in war paint. So, and then again, just the horrible fact that they did this under a white flag. There was knowledge that this was a horrible thing. Personally, I'm pretty sure Brigham Young knew what was going on. You got to understand, the government was basically a theocracy at the time. It was a religious state set up with Brigham Young as the governor and the prophet and the president, and I doubt anything went on without his knowledge. And I would dare say, based on the history of the things that we've read that Brigham Young taught and said, I have no doubt that this was all ordered by Brigham Young. But again, I have to back off and go, I have no facts, I have no proof. This convenient letter coming back from Brigham Young saying, leave these people alone. Again, I just think it's convenience. So, historically, I mean, this is a horrible thing. It's America's first 9/11, and it was absolutely a horrific crime that was done and massacre against these people. And the fact that they kept and let 17 children under the age of 6 live, and those kids were raised up in the LDS community, not remembering, not knowing, and some of them remembered vaguely, but essentially the party was murdered and these children were stolen. And that's what is not mentioned. It's not like these kids were sent on to go be with relatives or whatever. They were basically kidnapped and raised in the Mormon community. So again, it'll be interesting to see what comes with next week. But there's the thing. You've got to recognize that the fact of, if you look at what Mormon history has been taught over the years, it consistently changes from decade to decade, and as the information superhighway gets more and more robust, then the teachings of the Mormon Church of their history change, as they can no longer hide or deceive of what actually happened. So, I mean, it'll even be more interesting to see if anything new comes up with this over the next 20 years. But we'll see. Again, all we can do is watch. So thanks for hanging in, and I hope that this was helpful. Next week will probably be a whole lot more detailed and informative, so I'll be interested to see what they come up with in that. So, as always, preach the gospel at all times. Use words. They're necessary. And until next week, Soli Deo Gloria.